Today, we're diving into one of the most extraordinary stories of the 20th century. It's about the moment a lost world, totally isolated for thousands of years, collided head-on with the modern age. This is the story of the Leahy expedition, a documented first encounter that changed absolutely everything.
But to really get this, you have to start with a question. Just imagine for a second, your entire reality, everything you and your ancestors have ever known, is limited to a single valley. So what would you think if one day these beings with skin the color of spirits just appeared? Well, this wasn't some hypothetical for the people of the New Guinea Highlands. For them, it was real. You see, for decades, the outside world was operating under this massive misconception. They believed the rugged, mountainous heart of New Guinea was basically an empty, uninhabitable wilderness, just a blank spot on the map.
And this slide just lays it out perfectly. On the one hand, you have the official myth, an empty, impossible wasteland. But the reality, hidden away from everyone, was the complete opposite. Tucked between these massive mountain ranges with these incredibly fertile valleys, home to hundreds of thousands of people living in a complex, thriving society. This table really drives home just how different these two worlds were, existing on the very same island. You know, in the Highlands, life revolved around self-sufficient farming in tiny, isolated villages. Your whole world pretty much ended at the next mountain range. Meanwhile, down on the coast, you had Australian administrative centers connected by ships and planes to a global network. They were two completely separate realities, totally unaware of each other.
And when we say Stone Age, we're not being poetic. We mean it literally. These communities had no metal, no wheel, no written language, and absolutely zero concept of a world beyond their own valleys. They were like a hidden human ecosystem, a branch of our species that had developed for thousands and thousands of years in total isolation.
So into this untouched world walks Michael Leahy. And he wasn't a scientist or an anthropologist, nothing like that. He was a gold prospector. But he carried something with him that would turn out to be way more valuable than any gold he could ever find. So you've got Leahy, his brother Dan, and a patrol officer named James Taylor. Their official mission? To find gold. Their purpose was purely economic, but their journey would accidentally become one of the most significant moments in modern history, a meticulously documented first contact. And this is what makes this story just so unique. Leahy was obsessed with documenting everything. He carried not just a top-of-the-line Leica still camera, but also a 16mm movie camera. I mean, think about that for a gold prospector in the 1930s. His incredible foresight gave us this unprecedented, moving visual record of a culture seeing the outside world for the very first time.
Okay, so this brings us to the encounter itself. It's 1933 in the huge Wagi Valley. This is the moment when two branches of humanity, separated for maybe 40,000 years, finally come face to face. I mean, just try to wrap your head around it. With no context for other ethnicities, no knowledge of a world beyond your own mountains, the Highlanders reached for the only explanation that made any sense in their world. These pale-skinned beings couldn't possibly be human. They had to be spirits. Maybe their own ancestors coming back from the land of the dead.
And this quote right here, it just perfectly captures the profound confusion. It's such a human, real detail. The villagers weren't just staring. They were actively trying to figure it out, trying to rub the white color off because the alternative, that these beings were real and just different, was completely unimaginable. And because of Leahy's camera, we don't just have to rely on journals or stories. We can actually watch this collision of worlds unfold frame by frame. His footage gives us this incredible, unfiltered visual timeline of this amazing event. What's so fascinating when you watch Leahy's film is you can see a clear emotional arc. At first, it's just raw fear of these spirits. Then you see this deep confusion as they try to process what's happening. And finally, that universal human trait, curiosity, just takes over. They start moving closer, observing, and eventually making this tentative contact with what they thought were ghosts. And Lee's incredible records, they weren't lost to time. Decades later, in the 1980s, they became the foundation for this amazing documentary called First Contact, and it did something brilliant. It found and interviewed some of the Highlanders who were just kids during that first meeting, letting them tell their own stories of seeing spirits for the first time.
But this first contact wasn't just some quiet little encounter. It was the shockwave before a tsunami of change. Because the gold Leahy was looking for, well, it was there. And finding it kicked off a gold rush that would basically compress thousands of years of technological evolution into just a couple of years.
So while Leahy is making this historic contact in 32, you have to understand the machine of industry was already roaring to life nearby. A huge gold strike back in 1926 had set everything in motion. By 27, there was already an airstrip, and by 32, massive industrial dredges were starting to operate. The outside world wasn't just knocking on the door. It was about to break it down with overwhelming force.
Now, this created a huge logistical nightmare. How do you get massive industrial equipment into an impenetrable mountain range with no roads? The very same mountains that kept the Highland people isolated for millennia were now a modern engineering problem. The answer, incredibly, was the airplane.
This is just mind-boggling to think about. In the early 1930s, New Guinea became a world leader in air freight, all to support these gold fields. They weren't just flying in food and supplies, they were taking apart entire multi-ton gold dredges, flying them into the Highlands piece by piece on these big junkers aircraft, and then putting them back together. The sky itself became an industrial highway.
And this right here, this just perfectly illustrates the unbelievable shock of this story. On one side, you have a world defined by gardens, footpaths, and ancestral time. And on the other, a world of airstrips, massive airplanes, and tons of machinery literally falling out of the sky. It's one of the most abrupt, forceful technological leaps ever imposed on a human culture. And so we're left with this really profound question. The story of the Leahy expedition is so much more than an adventure tale. It's a stark look at a cultural collision. It forces us to ask, when one world operating on ancient time is instantly slammed into another, what's gained, what's lost, and how does a people's very identity manage to survive that kind of shock?